Hello, I'm Bill Tucker. By any definition, 2016 was a news year that won't soon be forgotten. From Britain's Brexit to President-elect Donald Trump, the establishment sustained some big losses. Over the next hour, we're going to take a look at some of the top stories of the year. A look at the good, the bad, the amusing, and the unbelievable is straight ahead. Has this been the worst year for Islamic or terrorist-inspired activity?
Well, I mean, ISIS has definitely promoted itself and carried out attacks more than they did in past years.
Right.
Whereas you had Al-Qaeda dropping, you have ISIS rising. So you hear less about Al-Qaeda and you hear more about ISIS. Is it a good year for ISIS? No, because we are defeating them every single way, and they now seem to be more on the run in Syria and Iraq than they were before, but we're still not there. As Jonathan and I both will agree, ISIS, to defeat ISIS, we have a long way to go. Law enforcement in this country is doing everything that they can on a daily basis to keep the people of this country and people visiting here safe. But we still, even in the law enforcement area, have a long way to go.
No, I agree with that, but it seems to me that if they're on the run, Tom, they're running here. Because you can look at domestic acts here. The Pulse Club down in Orlando would be a good example of it. You know, just recently, the guy at the Ohio State University campus who pulls his truck, runs into people, gets out, starts stabbing people, clearly terrorist-inspired. So that if he's right, they seem to be running here. Is that? Do you think? Agree?
Well, I don't know if we can actually say we have ISIS on the run. I think maybe we're going a little bit of a stretch there. I think right now, what we've seen over the past year is the biggest changes in their ability to grab land in the Middle East because of what's going on in Syria and the proxy war there, and what happened in Iraq, where we kind of started pressing them in certain areas. They've actually retreated on some of their land grabs. But where they've still continued to excel is online recruiting and spreading the Islamic message.
On July 14th, a Tunisian resident of France by the name of Mohamed Bouel drove a 19-ton cargo truck into crowds celebrating Bastille Day in the city of Nice, France. He killed 86 people and injured 434. France's president, François Hollande, extended the country's state of emergency, which had been in effect since the 2015 Paris attacks.
France is America's oldest ally and one of our strongest. We owe our freedom to each other. Americans and French have stood together for 2 centuries, and I told President Hollande that we will stand united now in our grief, in our praying for the many who are injured, many of whom are still fighting for their lives, and we pledge to stand with our French friends as we defend our nations against this scourge of terrorism and violence.
Between September 17th and September 19th, New York and New Jersey suffered multiple explosions which left 31 people injured. The FBI identified Ahmad Khan Rahimi as the sole assailant and captured him shortly after the attacks.
We are living in a time, we better get very tough, folks. We better get very, very tough.
Rahimi was allegedly influenced by the extremist teachings of Al-Qaeda's bin Laden.
You're always going to have the danger in any country that something like that could happen. How do you get on top of it is the major question.
People are already fundamentalized, and it's very easy for jihadist groups to reach in and pull people out. What I think we need to get to, and what we have not done this year, is people keep saying we need to use the term radical, but we don't need to use the term radical. We need to look at who the enemy actually is, and that's where we failed.
Now we turn to police shootings. Here is a shocking number. At least 61 law enforcement officers were shot and killed during 2016. On July 7th, a gunman killed 5 police officers in Dallas, Texas, one of the worst days for American law enforcement in history. Many claim that Black Lives Matter protesters have fueled much of the tension and the violence against law enforcement over the past year. I want to get into the other side of the terror, which we've seen this year with Black Lives Matter. And we've seen a lot of terrorist activity inspired by that movement. Unfortunately, a lot of it has been aimed at police. We've had 60, as we're having this conversation, there have been 61 police in this country killed by this anger. Is this, Tom, you spent your years in law enforcement, you were a New York City cop. This has got to be chilling to you on a couple of different levels, and what do we do about that?
Well, we have to give the police better equipment and protection. We have to stand by our police. We have to have our government officials voice the rhetoric that's going to support our cops, not send representatives from the White House to the funeral of a guy who robbed a store, tried to take a cop's gun, and was killed because he was fleeing a robbery and happened to be stopped by a brave police officer. And that's who you send White House officials to. You need a White House now and government officials who are going to stand by the people who stand by us, who protect us on a daily basis. Everyone who wears the blue uniform and is a security guard or protects some of our infrastructure has to be protected not only by their commanders and their police officials and government officials, but also by the White House.
Do you think Trump certainly set that tone during the campaign? Do you think he was genuine in terms of sending the message that he will be the law and order guy, the guy who stands with the police?
I think he will, and I hope he sticks to that, because that resonated with a lot of people more than just conservatives. But I think one thing that you started out with this part of the interview, you labeled terrorism to Black Lives Matter. And that's very important, because people have to realize terrorism is a tactic. I've said it on this network before. It is the use of fear and intimidation for a political aim, right? So that's what Black Lives Matter is, and we have to get away from, in this country, what we've been doing for over the past year, which is calling people protesters when they're actually terrorists. And that's a big problem, because what happens is you're limiting law enforcement from doing their job. As Tom was just talking about, law enforcement needs better equipment. They need upgraded tactics from what they used to have. You know what happened in Orlando, where we had officers in there, instead of pushing forward, we pulled them out and waited for negotiators with somebody who's committing a terrorist act. It's not going to work. But by and large, I think the biggest problem is that we have administration officials, not just in the White House, but in city and state government and in law enforcement, that refuse to acknowledge what terrorism actually is and differentiate that from protesters just because they don't want to get into a heap of political trouble.
Two points based on Jonathan, which are very good points. The 2 points I have is, as a former law enforcement person, you can't allow any demonstration to get out of hand and burn down someone's store. That man has worked for that store, and as law enforcement and as government officials, you have to stop it. In North Carolina and Baltimore, we watched the opposite. We watched the mayor of Baltimore allow the police to stand by as stores were burned. That's the first point. And the second point is you have to give the police the equipment that they need. And when I say that, we had a White House who stopped military-grade equipment, surplus, being given to police departments to protect the cops at times like that.
Because of an image.
Because of an image problem. That's surplus military equipment that police departments can use, and they should be given it.
There were two major plane crashes this year that made the headlines. In May, Egypt Air Flight 804 from Paris to Cairo crashed over the Mediterranean Sea, killing all 66 people on board. Then on November 28th, Lamir Airlines Flight 2933 crashed in Medellin, Colombia, with Brazil's largest and most successful soccer club on board, killing 71 people. Up next, a political season for the record books, and the answer to the question, what do Trump, Clinton, and Mickey Mouse have in common?